Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Boosting Profitability Through Better Legal Billing as part of the Industry Insight series. Our speaker today is Erica Bursler. Erica is the Director of Strategic Communications at Cosmolex, developers of an all-in-one cloud-based legal practice management, billing, and trust accounting system specifically designed for solo and small law firms. Erica's degree is in business administration, and she has over 6 years of experience in the legal software industry, catering to the specialized technology needs of small to mid-sized law firms. Erica has given numerous presentations across the country on legal technologies such as law practice technology management, cloud computing, and legal billing and trust accounting compliance. The presentation today will be followed by a Q&A. Please enter your questions into the question box in the webinar panel on the right side of your screen. All questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. We are recording this webinar, and we will be sending the video in a follow-up email in a few days. We will also post the video on our blog at www.lawtechnologytoday.org. Thank you all for joining us. We'll now begin the webinar.
Great, thank you so much. Welcome everyone. I appreciate you attending the webinar today. So our topic is boosting profitability through better legal billing. So the order that we'll be following today is talking a little bit about the overall billing workflow, the different steps that are involved. I know many firms, depending on what your setup is, you may handle billing from start to finish. You may have several staff members that handle this activity. You may be part of that or not part of that. So I think it's good to do a refresh, talk about all the different functions within, but more importantly, focus on the 5 pitfalls that can really threaten your bottom line. So different challenges that law firms tend to have when going through their normal billing cycle, certain things to be aware of, and think of whether or not your firm is experiencing these challenges, and we'll talk about how to overcome them, more specifically with technology. I do think that billing is one of the main areas, considering efficiency is a big struggle when talking about billing. Technology can be really advantageous when trying to better that process. So that'll be our overall coverage for today, but we're going to start with, before we get into the billing workflow, just overall law firm needs. Now you see billing is here right at the top, legal time and billing, and we'll get more into those details. But the interesting piece here is how everything works together. You have your accounting pieces, your trust accounting, your different daily activities, and we'll talk a bit about, calendaring and tasks and documents and how that fits into billing as well. But all of these do interact at one point or another, sometimes daily, sometimes weekly, sometimes monthly. So they do influence each other, especially on a billing component, because a lot of these are billable activities. And also keep in mind that everything centers around that matter in the center. That's actually one of the points that we're going to bring up today as well. So what I'd like to say at the very start, before we get into any of these challenges, is think of what your setup is, what your workflow is. Do these areas communicate with each other well? You may be using 1 tool, 2 tools, 5 tools, or you might have a variety of different methods. So as we go through these different challenges, and like I said, we will be tying in technology as well, think about where the gaps may be in your practice and how you can possibly improve those or close those gaps if you can. So we're going to talk next about billing specifically. So like I said, here we have listed legal time and billing. What are the different components of that? The first thing that everyone thinks of with billing is tracking your time and expense, making sure that you're either tracking your billable time for hourly cases, or even if you're doing flat fee or contingency, very often firms want to be tracking their time that they're spending on those cases as unbillable time, because that is how you determine if you're charging the appropriate rate. So it doesn't necessarily matter if it's hourly or fixed fee. You want to be tracking that information. There's always costs involved. There's a lot of client costs that come from all different types of cases that you're paying out of pocket, and you want to make sure they get reimbursed by your client. That's another daily piece, and that will factor into one of the challenges that we talk about later. Managing your retainers. So retainers often, especially if they're managing the trust account, you think of it as like a trust accounting activity, but it very much influences your billing, because that is where you're eventually going to be earning your fee. If you don't have a retainer, obviously that's going to affect your ability to earn a fee, and it does play a role in your collections process. So you want to make sure that you're managing those properly. Then, of course, at the end of the month or whatever the billing cycle is for that particular case, you need to generate and deliver those invoices to your clients. The approval process falls in here as well, often, depending on your volume or if you have routine billing or not. Often before you're generating the invoices, you're reviewing a pre-bill or a report or the activity that took place on a matter. Then, hopefully, receiving payments. That's the idea. A big portion of our presentation today is centered around profitability. And of course, you can't earn any profit without receiving any payments. And we'll talk about how the whole collections process of earning those fees, there's a lot of proactive steps to take to have the best possibility of getting paid on those invoices, especially with the legal community. I mean, you're a service business, so it's very easy to increase those receivable balances, and often they're just waived, and that's something that you want to avoid if at all possible. And that goes into collections. So if you're not receiving your payments, which often is the case, then you need to think of, well, how am I following up with these people? What process do I have? And then also what tools can I use, or how can I leverage? I have to say technology, especially with collection, nobody likes collections. Nobody likes chasing their clients for money, but you do want to get paid at the end of the day. So that's the kind of the final piece if you do have those outlier balances that are sitting there. So this is overall billing from start to finish. Some of these are daily activities, some are monthly, some are quarterly, some maybe annually, doing some review, but they all need to be kept in mind. And like I said, you may only be doing time and expense entry, you might not be managing the rest, but you do want to be aware of the overall flow and how well these steps go together. How streamlined is let's say you have a monthly billing cycle. At the end of the month, how streamlined is your review, generation, delivery, and payment steps in your billing process? Is there big gaps there that are delaying that process, and that will actually delay you receiving payments, which of course will affect your profits as a law firm. Okay, so now we're going to get into some of the challenges that law firms face when going through that cycle, that typical billing cycle. Number one, which is often an oversight, but it's very important, is not having any measurements in place. So whenever you're dealing with, whether it's productivity, especially when you're talking about your time tracking, that factors into productivity, how much time is being spent, how much time is actually being billed. Of that, what's being collected. There's a lot of different factors in that billing process that you can analyze. You could see how well or not well things are going. Only what's measured can be improved. So if you right now don't know where you're at, how do you know where you need to be and how to get there? And a few examples when talking about measurements is specifically for billing, your WIPs, your work in progress. So that is your pending balance that's due to be billed. And you may think it's not really important until you invoice your client, but it's very important because maybe that balance is getting really high and you're going to decide to bill that client sooner rather than later because of that. Or maybe your WIP balance is actually higher than the retainer balance for that client. Well, you may need to reach out to that client and seek replenishment before you invoice them so that you avoid a collections issue. Or your receivable balance, that is your collections, that's your past due balance. Do you right now know the dollar amount of past due invoices you have currently? Or anybody in your firm, do they know that number? Can they, say off the top of their head how far behind you are in payments? That should be well known because you may need to stop work for a particular client, or you need to have a advanced conversation. Maybe you have some repeat offenders. So all of the measurements, it's collecting data, being able to look at that data and make some sense of it. Now, some ways of going about it, especially for billing, it's pretty straightforward, but I do love the idea of dashboards. A lot of billing softwares will give you a visual dashboard where it's just a simple way to see how things are going. It'll let you know if there's any red flags that you need to address. It'll help you to prioritize. very often these dashboards are billing and profit related. So you could see things like how much time has been entered during this week. Maybe the timekeepers are behind on entering their time. That could be addressed. Or my AR balance. Do I have a lot of past due invoices? I could see that very easily. And then I can decide what actions I want to take, but I'm at least aware on a daily basis. And then reporting, which is whatever decisions you need to make, whether you want to see how productive your staff is or how much money each person's bringing in, or the originators, how much money they're bringing in. A lot of reports are available. Typically, I mean, if you're talking about billing, those are in billing tools. If you're talking about accounting, often that's in your accounting tool, like if you're talking about actual income. But do you have the reports that are needed to make the decisions that you need to make? There's a concept too of data-driven decision-making, which can apply to all different areas of your practice, but especially with billing. This is exactly what it is, being able to identify where by like data, by actual numbers, not by how you feel, but seeing actual data and analyzing it to make the best decisions for your business. So I'm going to show you an example of a dashboard. And like I said, most billing programs have something very similar to this. But just to give you an idea in case you have never seen a dashboard before. So I just jumped into the Cosmlex system to give you an example. And I am on the dashboard section. And here we happen to have two types of dashboards. Most of the time, these are permission controlled as well, so not everybody in your staff will see it. But the examples that I gave before, my overdue invoices, I could see I have 144 of them. That may be normal, that might not be normal, depending on the size of my firm. But I can click on that number, I can expand that screen, I can look at these items and do from actions from there as well. So if that's not a normal number, I may want to dig a little bit and figure out what needs to be done. But again, I'm aware. Same thing with the time that's being tracked by different timekeepers. So if I do, let me put on a date range that has some balances, I could see here, Rick has 169, just over 169 hours that are billable. Again, I can click on that, see what those entries are, and do additional activities from there. So great way to be aware easily to see these visuals. They're usually very easily drillable or identifiable. And then each user should have their own to know what they need to focus on. Sometimes it's based on agenda, billable hours, what has not been billed yet, what needs to be billed, and depending on the type of tool that you're using, the dashboards may be a little bit different. But that's an example and very helpful to see when you first log in. Okay, our next item, which I talked about at the very beginning, is matter-centric record keeping. I would hope that all of you have your billing in some sort of legal specific tool. And the reason why I say that is because you have cases that you work on, you have matters that you work on, and everything you do for that matter has to be parked under that matter so that you have that record. Think of, having your filing folder in your filing cabinet that has that client and all the activity related to it. That too is considered a matter-centric record keeping system. So as long as everything's under that matter, then that's the best way to go. If you're not, I highly, highly recommend it, because all of those different items we talked about at the beginning, which is your billing, your accounting, your events, your documents, your communication with your client, they all go back to that client. Whether you get, let's say you need an audit trail to reference, I billed you X amount of dollars for this activity, which is linked to this event, to be able to follow that audit trail back, but also be able to quickly access matter-related information. When you are talking with your client and they have a billing disputes are very often based off of, well, justify the work you've done for me. How can you justify this bill of, let's say, $5,000? The way you justify that is through the activities that you've done. So if you don't have a solid path or record connecting that matter to whatever activities that you're doing, that becomes a much more complicated process. And the quicker you can answer those questions, the less likely that dispute will escalate. So that's something to keep in mind. If any of you have been through fee disputes, you know the type of questions that have been asked, and likely your processes has improved along the way. So if you're in the situation where you're not using a matter-centric system, of course, the benefit is, or the change that should be made is to use a matter-centric setup. I do have to say that really every legal specific tool should have a matter-centric setup. Some are client-centric, majority are matter-centric. You can use generic tools and kind of work it to represent projects or clients or matters, but you just want to be mindful of what you can connect to that. Is it just billable time, or is it also, the tasks associated to that file, the notes, the different events and appointments that took place? So be mindful of, no matter what system you have, what other activities can be linked to really create that 360-degree view of the particular matter. So another example of that, and like I said, any system that is matter-centric should have something very similar. But if I go to my Matter tab here, and I go within a file that I know has some activity, here's the matter details area. So just like I gave the example before of a file folder, if you have a file folder for John Smith, you want everything related to that case in that same area. This is just an electronic version of that. So being able to access your billing for that client, your transactions, your email, events, tasks, documents, notes, anything related to that case, link it to that matter. Everything here is for Jim's family law case. That way, if Jim calls me up and says, hey, what appointments are you referring to? I can go right here to the calendar. I can look at my full appointment history and reference it very easily. I can even export it and provide it to him as a record. So imagine in the different scenarios that you are, how much easier or difficult it would be to handle a client dispute related to billing. And that, of course, will result in hopefully you getting paid a lot faster. Okay, disconnected events, tasks, emails, and notes. Believe it or not, when I talk about, I kind of use the catch-all term of practice management. Everything that's not necessarily linked, it's not a financial. We're not talking about billing or accounting. We're talking about the day-to-day, all the collection of activities. You may have thousands of activities you're doing for a particular case. They could be happening in a variety of platforms. I think this is the area where most commonly, if you have staff or multiple attorneys at your firm, this is most commonly the area where everything is scattered amongst a variety of different tools and methods. This person's using iCal because that's what they prefer. This person's using Gmail. This person's using Outlook. I put my tasks on a sheet of paper. I use Asana for my tasks. I have this. There's so many different options. And it's also very much linked to preferences. They prefer to use a particular tool over another. So when talking about how this, what are some challenges that can happen with these daily activities, we have these listed here, which are the 4 C's. So the first one is compliance. This links to what I mentioned in the prior slide, is you need to have a proper billing audit trail. So matter-centric is important. These items are part of the matter activity. So you want to be able to link any activity that you've done for a case to that particular file. Collaboration. Now, usually when I think of collaboration, I think internally. Yes, if I'm an attorney, I want to be able to have that information accessed by my paralegal, maybe another attorney that I'm working with, maybe some support staff, absolutely. But also the client. You may need to share this information directly with your client. So what are some ways that you could do that? How are you doing that currently? Because I could tell you now, if you're collaborating well with your client, that improves your relationship with that client. It improves the communication with your client, and they will have less questions because they know what's taking place before that bill comes to them. They know what you've been doing for them. They're well informed. So you want to kind of look into whether it's sharing platforms for documents, being able to invite them, obviously, for all of your different events. There are items like client portals where you can share this data with your client, but also internally. If you're all using separate calendars, if you're all using separate task tracking, how are you working together? How are you able to assign something to somebody else and see where they are progressing on that task? Collection. This is all about these items being billed. So I mentioned the reverse. When your client gets a bill, they want to know what activities related to that fee, but the opposite is true too. You may have 20 appointments that took place. How many of those actually made it to an invoice? Are there those that don't make it to the invoice that you're essentially working for free? Because it fell through, or because you're referencing different tools, it wasn't captured. Having some way to feed this very seamlessly into your billing cycle is very important. And all different tools have different methods. Some do it through integrations, some have the ability to manage a calendar within the billing software. No matter how you do it, you just want to make sure you have a good process for those items to always make it to the invoice so that you hopefully get paid for that. And then cloud access. I would say this is one of the areas where this information can go out of date very quickly or can update very quickly, and you don't want to leave your office with a printout of your calendar for the day because it's out of date the second you leave that office. So being able to access it, whether it be on your phone or a tablet or your laptop or whatever you may have, to see if anything has updated or changed. So for technology, how it can help, or things to keep in mind, is matter-centric. Again, like I said, this did tie into the prior point, being able to link any related activities to your matters to make sure that they get billed. Encourage your users to collaborate in the same tool. Like I said, that doesn't mean they all need to change their tools, but there's a lot of integrations, especially for billing softwares, with things like calendars, task tracking tools, even some note-taking tools as well. So if they have a preference or comfort level, look for tools that integrate with those options. And the reason being is they can continue to use whatever tools they're using, but everything feeds into the billing system at the end of the day. And hopefully that billing system has a way to kind of keep an eye on those items and make sure that they are billed. And look for tools that have the mobility options, whether it's a mobile app or some way to access outside the office. Might not be used by everybody in the staff, but when we get into our next point, which is kind of getting into time expense tracking, the ability to stay on top of your items in real time is really important, because if an appointment were to change, if a task were to be completed and you need to be notified, we're not in our office all the time anymore. It used to be that you sit at a desk 9 to 5 and beyond. That's not always the case. Very often we're on the go and in different locations. So you just want to be able to have that access. This is one of my favorite points, unrecorded time and expense. It is not my favorite because it is necessarily a good thing. It's my favorite because it's a very common thing. A lot of law firms struggle with getting all of their time and costs recorded in a accurate and timely manner. So the first thing is knowing the items that got dropped. You know, how do you account for, especially if you have multiple tools that you're using, how do you account for or catch those items that never make it to the bill? You have a lot of things that take place out of the office, like I mentioned, so you need to be able to track those items in real time and ensure they make it to your client's bill. But more importantly, expenses. You pay costs out of pocket all the time for all of your clients in a variety of ways. You may pay by credit card, by check. Maybe you only had cash on you one day and you had to pay a filing fee by cash. How are you ensuring that those two are captured, linked to the matter, which is that next point, actually allocated to the matter they're related to so that they're getting billed? These are the two biggest areas, I think, that affect your bottom line. Reason I say that is I can guarantee you that each one of you on the call have costs that never make it to the invoice. You know they're there, you just might not be sure how much it is or how bad of an issue it is. But I'm sure there's expenses that you're paying and not actually billing to your clients. That's income straight out of your firm. That is preventable. Same thing with time. If your different activities that you're doing, as I mentioned before, are not making it to your invoice, you're working for free and your client is not paying for that work that you're doing. So keeping on top of these items is crucial to your firm's profitability. Things to keep in mind, again, mobile access. I can't stress it enough. It is the greatest tool you can have in capturing your day-to-day, because you will have throughout the day different appointments that happen, different costs that you may need to pay. If you enter it in that moment, two things. One, you know it will get to the bill because it's already linked to that matter. But two, the description, the information is more accurate. If you're waiting until the end of the month to review this information and see what you've missed, it's a lot harder to even realize you missed it. but also that accuracy goes way down. You're starting to estimate, you're trying to recall as best as possible, and you might be chipping yourself out of some well-earned fee. Another point to bring up is fees and imports. This is excellent if you're not the best at capturing specifically costs. If you know that there's things that you miss, you're not sure how, and you're just struggling with that. There's a lot of accounting tools that sometimes work with your billing tools to feed in costs. One of the best ways for that is credit card. If you use internal credit cards and you want to make sure all those costs are accounted for, link it to your credit card bank, or have whoever handles your expenses import a statement every month. And that will let you know everything that took place on that credit card. They could see what got missed. They can record it to the matter if they need to, and that way you will get reimbursed. So you could use it just as an import function, but it's also good as almost like a reconciliation to make sure everything was accounted for. And you do want to have streamlined workflow between your billing and accounting functions. If you have your billing in one tool and your accounting somewhere else, it is still very possible to record the transaction and forget to enter it for billing for your client. And again, that means they won't be billed for it and you won't get paid for it. So you want to make sure that whatever that workflow is, whether it's in the same tool, whether it's a sync, whether somebody's entering the data multiple times, whatever that is has to be as foolproof as possible, so that you can ensure that you're billing for those particular items. So some examples on that very quickly is when we talk about mobility. I'm not going to demonstrate that here, but a lot of tools, especially the cloud-based billing tools, have mobile apps. So you can see at the very top here, I have a timer. I also have a timesheet here. These types of functions are very often available in these types of apps. Access it right on your phone or tablet, track those items, and it will sync with whatever system you are using. So if mobility is important to you, if having an app is important to you, then a cloud-based application may be the best option. Also talking about costs. So a lot of times bank feeds and imports are fairly new to many firms. Sometimes your accountant or bookkeeper would handle it, if at all. So to give you an example of that, I'm going to come here to the accounting area. And I have let me sort my bank accounts here. I have an American Express credit card that I'm tracking. And here I can open that up and I can actually import transactions. And you can see I have a list of items that have come from my credit card bank in which the details are already there. I just need to select which chart of account, basically what expense account it's for. And if need be, I can edit that item and post it to a matter as well for billing. So it's all about knowing your workflow and where there may be gaps to improve. But I definitely encourage feeds or imports if you're struggling with tracking your costs. And our last item that we'll talk about is collections. Payments is how you get paid. That is how you become a profitable business, is actually getting paid from your clients. And collections actually one of the areas that are given the least amount of attention. I know so many law firms, when I ask what's your collections process, they don't really know. They don't have an answer for me. Or they'll just say, oh, we review it every few months and we give some phone calls. But is that working? Are you getting results out of that? It's not a fun process, so nobody really likes to put the time into it. But like I said, that is how you get paid. Waiving should be your last resort. Many efforts should be done, both proactive and reactive, before you go about waiving the balances of your invoices. I do know firms that they wait till the end of the year, they look at the AR balances, and they just start writing stuff off because it's been, I don't know, 6 months, a year past due. Let's just write it off. You want to prevent that because, again, if you're waiving your fee and your costs, you're working for free and you're not getting reimbursed for those costs. Sometimes it's appropriate, but you don't want that to be the first collections step. And there are preventative things that you can do to reduce collections. That actually comes down to your billing cycle, some things to keep in mind. So first, timely routine billing. If you can do that, I encourage it because it's predictive for your client. They know when that bill is coming. It's regular, it's routine. You want to get those bills out as quickly as possible. If your bill review process is 2 weeks, you want to cut that down. You can actually, with a lot of the technology that's out there, review your bills, finalize them, and deliver them to your clients within a couple of days. Sometimes even less, depending on what your volume is. So you want to get it out as soon as possible because that gives more time for your client to review, ask any questions, and then hopefully pay you. You want to use batch billing tools. Almost every billing software I know has some way to generate a batch. You can set up invoice templates, get all those bills generated at the same time. I know a lot of firms that really hold on to customizing each and every invoice. You could do that, but you need to know the time that had to be vested in that. Periodic collection notices. Just like batch billing, a lot of softwares have the ability to send out collection notices in a batch. Very easy, very automated. Leverage your tools. Your system, if you're doing billing in some sort of software, it already knows who's past due, by how much, what that invoice includes, and can likely notify your client in a really efficient manner. Don't forget to track your retainers. I mentioned that towards the beginning. Whether you do all retainers or just some, you want to be aware of where they are, seek replenishment early. That's called evergreen retainers. You want to make sure that you always have money in that retainer and that you're not chasing your client because that will delay your payment process even further. And having that visibility of your receivables, which is what's owed, your work in progress, and your retainers. That will help you to plan your bills better. Know when clients should be billed, maybe change how you're communicating with your client based on the billing balances that they currently have. Okay, and my final point is just choose your tools wisely. We talked about a few things with legal specific. Is your billing and accounting spread out? Are your calendar and task tracking spread out? How are you able to ensure everything makes it to the bill? How do you make sure that there's less disputes, better communication? All of those factor into whatever setup that you have when you're generating your bills. There's a lot of factors there. So streamlining that workflow, ensuring that your client is happy, has their questions answered, and hopefully will pay you that much sooner. So we did show a little bit about Cosmlex today, but if you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to hear from you.